Joe Coleman, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, happy to have you. So I want to do a little bit of, we might touch on some topics, but I want to do like a biographical sketch, because those seem to be the things that like last the longest. And stories, they can last for ages and ages. Even looking back to the stories of Jesus and everything, and we draw the most lessons from them instead of rather. We could discuss one topic, whether it's, the new New York City mayor, whatever that is, but then in 10 to 15 years, no one's going to really care about that. So that's particularly why I like to do these biographical sketches. So why don't we start off with, you can go as long as you want. Where were you born? What was your childhood like? And, let's start from there.
I feel like I should be laying down on the couch telling you about this. I'm originally from Southern California. We moved around a good bit. I kind of split my growing up between. I was a kid in Northern California, and I grew up in Southern California. I moved down when I was about in the sixth grade. So what is it, like 12, something like that. So I split my growing up on the West Coast. I moved around a good bit. Um, That's yeah, not wildly interesting. A large part of who I am and how I got here, I suppose, comes from my time as a freelance writer. I was a content writer for a number of years. I did radio. I worked up. I mean, really throughout the country. I lived in Washington for a bit. I had a stint living in Alaska, which is where I learned to produce audio. All of that, I suppose, is fairly formative when it comes to who I am and how I got here. I was an on-air host and producer and a writer. It was a small station. We all wore a lot of hats, so I had an on-air shift. I learned to produce there. I didn't go to school for audio production or anything like that. I got a BA in philosophy and sort of found myself in radio right out of college, but learned it. Enjoyed the creative aspect of it. There is something of not just editing, but when you're fully producing a long form news story, or you're creating some jingle or whatever the case may be for your air shift, your bumpers, all those fun things. Like I really fell in love with the creative aspect of audio. I think, and I love video as well. Don't get me wrong. I just think that there is, you're kind of handcuffed in audio in a way you're not in video. Which in some ways, having more options is actually more difficult, and having fewer options requires you to exercise your creativity. So, this is no digs to my video friends. There are pros and cons to both, but audio, I found you have to tell the story uh, clearly and in a creative way because you don't have that video medium. It's like we did radio plays and things like that, long form, and it's difficult, but it is a craft I really came to love. And after a number of years of content writing for freelance and agency settings, I decided that was no longer for me. I think I kind of burned out on it. I enjoyed doing it. I still do some magazine features here and there for travel stuff, but I've pretty much moved on from that. The the industry killed me a little bit, which I think many creatives can probably relate to, especially people who went into business for themselves. Eventually, you kind of go, look, I understand the agency appeal. It's solid. It's stable, as stable as anything is right now, but it's not for everyone. And it turned out it was not, not for me. Um, and so I went back to business for myself, where I am in our studio right now, our very makeshift studio, which is why I have a Harbor Freight moving blanket behind me. I used to have an actual recording desk, and we had a baby about 4 months ago, and so I was working from home. We're still in transit. We're at the end of a lease. It's a whole deal. So if this is ugly and offends your viewer sensitivity, my apologies. But yeah, I mean that's the short history of life, I suppose, that brings us to where we are.
Yeah, and so you mentioned you had a BA in philosophy, and then you got kind of thrown into the radio realm. Um, like what exactly were you wanting to do as you're going to, school and getting a BA in philosophy, and then that ends and you're like, oh, here's radio, and you're kind of thrown into the midst. Was that
Yeah.
always the hopes, or?
Oh gosh, no. No. I I say that so I'm in my late 20s, and I say that people about my age are probably the last generation, the, like, youngest millennials, eldest of Gen Z, probably the last generation where you were told, "Go to college as a 100% thing that you just do no matter who you are, unless you're some sort of rube, like, you just go to college, even if that's a community college, and, that's college with an asterisk." So, I was again, I think probably the last generation to deal with that, but, that kinda hit me, and from, like, beginning of freshman year, your guidance counselor is just talking to you about college, so I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll go to college. I guess that's what you do." And I went in as an undeclared liberal arts major. I was looking to do we had a pretty good entrepreneurship program, as good as maybe collegiate entrepreneurship can be. I mean, you could debate whether you should even study it, but I was looking at that. Didn't end up doing it because my grades were really bad and it was a competitive program. So I took a intro to philosophy, like a lower diff requirement, and I really enjoyed it. And so I went, well, I should probably declare a major and just did that. I didn't I didn't really have much of a plan on it. I really fell in love with the discipline. Like I loved doing philosophy, doing the writing and the reading and the arguing and all that. And I figured, what's better than some school, more school. So I'd just go on to do a PhD, or if I could find one of those like fully funded MA programs that exist occasionally out there, those unicorn programs, maybe I would do that and I'd teach, or I would go into nonprofit work. That was, and I think that in the same way that I was the last generation, in my opinion, to be pushed to college as a de facto option, I think also dying at that same rate is the idea in Christian circles that the only good, or if nothing else, the highest good is to work in a nonprofit and to make $45,000 a year and to do the work of the clergy, like, in an ideal sense, and be paid for it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. People do need to do it. And I'm glad that they do. But I think I was also told that you have to do that as a Christian, as a Catholic. Like, this is what you do, and so I kind of fell into that. Radio just kind of happened. I was all set to go teach, actually, in do a year of post grad service teaching in South Dakota, and something just wasn't right. I was set to teach. I don't even remember what I was set to teach. I think like theology or something like that, probably. And they had a teacher who they didn't expect to come back, who did come back, and they went, "Okay, well, you can probably teach history." And I was like, "All right, that's adjacent. I enjoy history. It's a liberal art, fine." And then that one didn't work out, and they basically went, "Look, we'd love to have you. You can teach PE." And I was like, "Okay, this. I mean, somebody's got to do it. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's me." And so I reevaluated my options. I'm pretty at the last minute. And my mom happened to see an advertisement for this radio station in a magazine or something. And she like texted me. It's like, "Hey, have you heard about this?" And I go, "Yeah, I think I'm familiar." I worked in an office on campus in college that I don't remember, the Center for Service and Action. That's what it was called. It basically ran all the service programs that our organizations, that our service organizations and our fraternities and sororities would do, whatever their communal service hours through there. It coordinated with some local partners, things like that. And I worked in that office throughout college. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I think I've seen this somewhere." We would send somebody to the program every few years. So I applied, and I heard back pretty quick and just went, "Okay, I'll check this out, see what's going on." I got an interview. It went well enough. I thought it went terribly. I thought the lady hated me. It turns out that's just kind of how she was. So that it was, comforting in the end. But, it's just very intense. And so I go, "Okay." And then they hit me back pretty quickly within a week or so. And they go, "Hey, we'd love to have you. We need your decision in like 10 days." I go, "Okay, let me think about it." So basically, I've got, a week and a half to decide, do I want to move to rural Alaska in like 3 months? And it sounded cool. And I had no better options, or really any other options. So I went, "All right, I'll do it." And yeah, stumbled into it, failed upward, and just kind of ended up there in pure happenstance. No merit on my own. It just sort of became that way.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, kind of like how you believe that your generation was like the last generation of parents saying, "Hey, you gotta go to college." It's kinda just the thing
Mhm.
that happens. And then, like, you did philosophy, and then you stumbled into radio, and, you were going to teach theology or history or then PE at some point.
Something, yeah.
And, like, many people don't think kind of philosophy and radio go hand in hand, and maybe they do to a certain extent. Um, but do you think that the college, like, philosophy benefited you in what you're doing now? Um, or was it just kind of like, "Oh, I have this degree in philosophy and, it helps me out in maybe
Yeah.
these little areas here and there," but
Yeah, that's a good question. This is something I try to review every once in a while to make sure I didn't waste like a $250,000. I mean, I got scholarships, I didn't pay that, but I really do think it benefited me. I think there's this kind of concern among Catholics, especially because it's Catholic universities, but Christians broadly, that when you go to college, you lose your soul, and the theology department is well out of orthodox, and it's all just a hellhole, and you shouldn't go. I don't think that's completely wrong by any means, and our theology department was not great, but our philosophy department was really solid. I didn't know this. I happened into it, but I think what I learned there that I I always say when I'm asked this that philosophy and liberal arts degrees, at least good liberal arts education, is a non-linear degree as opposed to a linear degree. And these aren't real terms, but I just use them like in oversimplified terms, you get a chemistry degree to be a chemist, you get a marketing degree to be a marketer. You don't really get a philosophy degree to be a philosopher. To some degree, yeah, sure, if you teach and write at like the highest level, like um, collegiate, sure, or you're writing for some magazine. I don't know, but for the most part, that's not really the road you follow. But a good liberal arts education does help you to think more of effectively. I think it makes you a better systems thinker. So you can look 10,000 feet up and go, well, I don't know radio, but I do understand how to learn things efficiently. I do have now, because of my degree, a pretty good sense of like pattern recognition, critical thinking, problem solving, all these buzzwords. I really think that studying philosophy did help me. I think it made me not just smarter, but I think it made me just better at thinking, which, for for all the money I spent on it, you'd think I'd have a better sentence for it. But that really is what it is. Like I think it made me a more efficient and precise thinker, which I mean helps me every day. It's one of those things especially if you run your own business, you have to solve problems all the time, and some of them you've never seen before. So you have to draw on what you do know to, kind of punt it over to this new scenario and just figure your way out through the dark. So I'm, I'm still paying off the student loans, but, one more year, we're almost done. But I really am glad. Like, I don't regret it. I really am glad I got the education I did. I recognize that many people my age, and especially even older, cannot say that because they just wasted their money. If you didn't get a good education or you didn't meet a lot of interesting people who, can benefit you in life, you can work for, they can work for you, you can build something together, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, it was probably just 4 years of binge drinking and mediocre education that you're now in debt for the rest of your life for, and you can't discharge it even by bankruptcy. So you're just up a creek. I'm very glad I'm not one of those people. And I can say I got some use out of it and continued to do so.
yeah. I mean, you even mentioned of kind of like how, in the theology department, and, really in like all institutions, there's sort of a corruption. There's corruption here and there. Um, do you think that maybe like, going and getting maybe like one of these, more broader degrees where it will help you in kind of all aspects, whether it's like thinking more critically about, the world and your decisions. Do you think that the majority of people should do that? Or do you think it's, really hard to come by with all the corruption that can go on in whether it's colleges, universities, whatever it may look like?
Yeah, I think most people shouldn't go to college. At least not a 4 year. I mean, there are some like my wife went to a junior college before transferring to a 4 year, and the junior college she went to was phenomenal for the money and the quality of it. Like it was great. So I would just like knowing nothing about whomever I'm talking to, if they went, "Hey, stranger, I need your opinion on this. Should I go to college?" I'd just say no. Like, no, you probably shouldn't. At least not a 4 year. I think partially because of, as you're saying, institutional corruption, or even just like poor curriculum that you don't really learn anything, or worse, you only learn bad things. I think that from a practical sense, it's a bad deal unless you want to be a, doctor, lawyer, something like that, like a profession. And I don't mean that as a pejorative sense, like a properly understood profession, like the legal profession, the medical profession, things like that. You want to do that? Sure. Go to college. The upside is good. You're going to go into a lot of debt, but you're going to make a lot of money. And, if you have a passion for it and a skill for it, sure, I think that's fine. I would say take a year or two off after high school and then see if you still want to do it before you go into law school, med school, whatever your thing is, or just college in general. But I don't think most people need to go because it's a bad deal. You learn useless stuff for the most part. I mean, there are some universities and some programs that are phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying whole hog it's bad. But I think that trade schools, junior colleges, or just like reading on your own. There are great if you don't want to like freestyle it. There are good. I know the like. What's out there? I think the Albertus Magnus Institute, the Augustine Institute, things like that. Like there are these good curriculum programs that are fairly inexpensive for what you get, and they offer you that structure of college, which I get the appeal on that one. I do get the appeal of structured learning. It helps you to be efficient, make fewer mistakes, maybe. But no, I think college is for most people a bad deal. This isn't to say college is bad. I just think that there was a time when high school was much better and college wasn't needed for most people because one, fewer of our jobs were fake. Most of our jobs are fake. I mean, I say all the time that I have like the most real version of a fake job that you can have. Like my job is computer. Like my job is fake. But I run my own business. I do get to manipulate the most real things in digital space, like audio, video. I think that's about as close as you get, especially doing it for yourself. But my job is still kind of fake. I, to some degree, I wish I went to trade school, but you can't do it over again. I think most people would be better off learning a skilled trade or getting a general studies degree at the junior college level, or finding a curriculum, or just taking a year off. Go get a job, go travel to Europe, do whatever your thing is. A year out of college on your own will do you so much good, and you will be much clearer in your next step instead of just being like, cattle herded from high school to college. Even if you add 1 year on there, you're going to learn so much, and you may learn the college is for you. And if that's the discernment you have and you realize you should go to college, great. Yeah, do it. I would say probably start out at a junior college just for money, if nothing else. But yeah, I'm not against college. I think most people don't need it. I think it's a bad deal unless you really know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned earlier, we can kind of dive into where you are now with your business and everything. But you mentioned that you were, doing the radio program, and then you got a little burnt out. So, and then you kind of are, at where you're at now and editing podcasts, running your own business. How did you get there? And kind of how, because I guess, some people have a fear of, going from this place where they're employed, they get to do what they love. They don't have to worry about, am I going to make money today? I show up to work, I work the hours, I get paid, whereas you now are running your own business. And so it's up to you to, make ends meet, each other and, produce that revenue. So kind of where, from the radio program, how did you make the decisions and what was it like coming to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, again, like a lot of professional career, I happened into it. I have failed my way upward so far the whole time. I don't want to stop. It's better to just let me fail upward than let me do it on my own merit. I'm sure I wouldn't do as well. But it was so when I stopped doing radio, it was COVID. My I ended my radio career in uh like May 2020, I think, like late spring, beginning of summer 2020. And so after that, I knew I wasn't going to stay at the radio station. I moved home. Everything, like, this was early COVID. Everything was like really uncertain, and I didn't really want to get a job in my hometown. That's really it. Like that's why I tried to start writing. I didn't want to get a job in my hometown. I um I just went, okay. I wrote news for a long time. Well, a long time. I wrote news for like a year, but I'd written academic papers. I'd done plenty of writing. I've been doing it for years, both in school and on the side, and for money, for free, all that. And I was like, all right, I bet I can make a go of it and just see. I've got a few grand in my bank account saved. I'm gonna take $1,000 out. I'm gonna buy a MacBook, and I'm gonna just get into it. And I was living at home, so my expenses were near zero, which was very beneficial. I had it easy in a lot of ways. I just started going. I got on Upwork, Fiverr, all of those like gig work sites. I think to some degree, again, I failed Upward. If you're starting out on Upwork, Fiverr, all those things now, I think you have a much more difficult road ahead of you than I did. Like I did this before ChatGPT existed, and before every company went, it's either ChatGPT or India, and just started outsourcing all their stuff, or just completely cutting the job. Which was funny. We're seeing that already come full circle, and companies are now paying a bunch of money to hire writers. But all this to say, yeah, I just thought it might be a good idea. I thought it'd be a way I could make money without having to get a job in my hometown. And I made a little bit of money here and there, and each month was a touch better than the next. And slowly I built it up, and I moved, got an actual job, got a second actual job. I think how many actually? I had three actual jobs in like 8 months or so. It was a weird time. It was all odd jobs. Like I worked at a kennel, I worked at a school, I worked doing some recruiting. It was a whole deal. But then I moved back home a second time and went, all right, I've been doing the writing thing. I do it on the side. Maybe I can make a go of this full time. And I just kind of kept going at it. And I was a decent writer and a pretty good marketer, and I had decent business sense. My dad ran his own business. His dad ran his own business. I think it's probably just genetic, more so than a skill on my part. And I just sort of kept going. And that got me enough money to get by, and then I just kept doing it for 4 years or so, and 2023-ish, 20 I think like 2023 sometime, the economy had started to turn down. AI had come on the scene. Jasper AI, which I don't even think still exists, took a bunch of my business, and I lost a ton of money basically overnight. I got an offer from a local agency, and I went, great. Yeah, it's like 70 grand a year. That's awesome. That's more money than I've seen in my life. I will take it. And I did that for a while, but it just burned me out on writing websites for local contractors and local businesses. I couldn't do it. Good people, good work, nothing wrong with it. It's just, I, eventually I just went, I'm so tired. I can write a website in my sleep. Like I've done this website 10 times before. It's a local plumber. I can do this in like a day. I can write the whole copy for it. And that stopped being fun or even like challenging. And I stopped caring about it. And so I realized that I needed to take another stab at working for myself. And, here we are. We're keeping the lights on. We're paying the bills. It's not too bad. But yeah, I really think I just sort of failed upward, burned out, and then tried a new thing, and then we're here. It's not a very exciting story, but it's how it happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain ideas of like, you gotta, figure out what to do, and, you know, don't like, you know, certain things of, like, trial and error, like, keep trying things, um, but then eventually, you've gotta figure something out. Did you ever have
Yes,
that
you
moment
do.
where you were like, "Oh, shoot, have switched, jobs in 8 months and, had these different jobs, and,
Yeah.
can still, you know, pay the bills, but not enjoying what I'm doing." Um, did you ever have that moment where it's like, "Okay, I really, really gotta figure out what am I gonna do?" Or, someone come to you and be like, "Hey, I see you're doing all these things, and yeah, you're making it work, but you switched, jobs 3 times in 8 months, like, find your footing in a way."
Yeah, I think I am pro job hopping. I have not found that anyone cares for the most part, but I also didn't make it to a particularly high level. So I think if you're somebody who's pursuing upper management dreams or something like that, maybe that 2-year rule is good. It worked fine for me. I I don't know if I'd recommend it as a rule, but it worked fine for me. So, but it's funny you say that. So yes, I mean, well, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is to your question of, do I need to go, like, did I have a moment where I needed to go find something I love or I'm passionate about or something like that and dial in? No, I wouldn't say I've had that moment. I this may sound funny. I don't particularly love what I do. It's it's just a job. It's it is a job that affords me a lot of things I like. I like the flexibility. I like running the business, but I don't have a strong passion for what I do, and I say that to say I don't actually think you need to. There's a couple of, and there's a couple people well smarter than I am who say things like this. Like Alex Hermosi talks about this a good bit, and he's basically just like the only answer is volume. Just keep doing it. Just do more of it. Do it for longer, and you'll be good at it, and you'll make money. And I think that's probably right. And Cal Newport has a book that talks about this. It's what's so good they can't ignore you. I think is it. And he basically says that. I mean, this is an oversimplification, but working for your passion is kind of silly. You just need to work a job you don't have a moral opposition to, and your passion will come from getting really good at it. I tend to think that's right. I I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy getting better at it. I do enjoy perfecting the craft. But there was no point where I realized I needed to do something I love. I don't think I've ever done something I, like, truly love. I think working in radio, doing a radio show was the closest thing I ever had to having a job that I loved. And I don't mean this in some sort of, like, sad nihilistic way. More so, I think in entrepreneurship, there's this idea that you have to have the dream job that you're ultimately passionate about. And I think for most of us, it's fine to just pay the bills in a job you enjoy and are good at. Like, I don't think you need this. I don't think you need it to be a lifestyle. It can just be a part of your life. And I think, like, I think that's perfectly fine. And I try to say this anytime I can, especially in like these sort of entrepreneurial conversations where I'm like, you don't have to feel bad about working a job that you're good at and you enjoy well enough, but like it's just what you do. And the same way, I don't think everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. If you're making good money and you have stability and you enjoy it, just stay there. You don't need to run your own business if you don't want to. That said, I mean, you could argue about the stability and whether working for yourself is actually more or less stable than working for somebody else. But so all this to say, no, I never really felt the need to love what I do, but I did have a moment where I knew I needed to get it together, and it was not long after I quit my last and potentially last ever W-2 job. I think I'd been working for myself again for like 6 weeks, maybe, give or take. And my wife tells me she's pregnant, and I'm like, oh gosh, okay, I mean, this is great, good, I'm very excited, but now I have to go make money, and like today. Uh, so that was a kick. But it worked. I mean, there's a reason that married men make more money than single men, and married men with children make more money than the both of the previous categories. There is like something just flips in your brain, and you have this new need, and you just go do it. I mean, hopefully, assuming you're at half decent morally, like you just go do it. And so, yeah, that's a long answer to just say, I don't think you need to love what you do. and I did have a moment where I needed to make money, and so far we're still paying all the bills. So, God is nice. I'm dumb. He provides for me. It's a simple life I lead, but it's one I enjoy.
Yeah. And so you're running your business now. Why don't you give the
Mhm.
audience kind of a overview of what you do, and what does like a day-to-day life look like for you?
Yeah, so I run a business called Kolbe Studios, named for Saint Maximilian Kolbe, the Polish priest who gave his life for a family man in Auschwitz. The man he gave his life for in the death camp did end up living, and he made it home to his family. He lived out the rest of his days. It's a beautiful story. And he, among other things, Saint Kolbe had a newspaper and a radio program. He was a very proponent. He was a very big proponent of new media. At the time, it was new media, right? Um, and so he's a Catholic patron saint of communications. And so St. Colby Studios is named in honor of him. It is a Catholic podcast production agency. What we do is we fundamentally two things. We take over production of existing podcasts to produce them at a higher quality level and to grow them. And we help people build podcasts from the ground up, like, zero to launch in 10 weeks or less. And yeah, I mean, on a day to day basis, I produce podcasts. Work on I work on audio. I work on video. I have a few subcontractors who I work with. I'm very blessed that a bunch of people I know here locally in Tyler are talented and willing to work with me. So I have a buddy of mine who I see, maybe multiple times a week in a good week, who does my graphics. He's a local guy. I've got a buddy who helps with some color correction. I'm not a video guy by trade, so I've taught myself well enough, but I'm not an expert. So when we need something real specific, I call in a contractor. But yeah, I produce audio, produce video. I run the St. Colby Studios podcast, our in-house podcast. I do some marketing. I email people and send them DMs on LinkedIn and all the other places I am, and ask them if they'll give me money in exchange for podcast production services. Many of them do not, but enough of them do that my family gets to eat and all my contractors get paid. It's yeah, I mean, it really is. Again, it's as real as a fake job gets. It's all in the digital sphere. None of it's tactile, but I can tell you what I do in a sentence. I produce audio and video podcasts. I don't have to say I live at the intersection of B2B SaaS and AI ultra growth, or I don't know, whatever consultants say. Yeah, it is that simple.
Yeah, and so I mean, you mentioned, kind of you mentioned a glimpse of the story of St. Colby of like, how why you named your business after him, and what why don't you give a bit more of that story? Because just from that teaser, it sounds like a very interesting story and a story that people need to hear because people hear, stories nowadays, but then there's not enough stories being told of, people that have done heroic things. And it's not like they're, some superhero. And yet they do things that, change the course of people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. There was a movie recently about St. Colby. Depending on when this comes out, you may have the opportunity to stream it. It's already out of theaters, but it's called Triumph of the Heart. It was a masterpiece for low budget film, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that purely factually. I think they had like I don't know, half million, maybe $1 million budget, and they put together something like theater ready. It's incredible. It's a beautiful movie. It talks. So my summary will not be nearly as good. If you can watch the movie Triumph of the Heart, go find it, go stream it, go pay for it, do what you got to do. It's great. It's a great story. Saint Colby was he was a Franciscan friar conventional, OFM con for whatever the letters past him are. So he was, among other things, a great proponent of new media. Like I mentioned, he published a Polish language newspaper because he was Polish, or he was in Poland and in Krakow, I think, and called the Militia the Immaculata, something like that. It's also in Polish, whatever it is in Polish. I don't speak it, but he saw, among other things, um, communism, socialism, nihilism, kind of all three branches of the same thing, as a real problem, uh, especially in the world of the post-industrial revolution, and saw that these technologies were not necessarily bad, that they could be used, the printing press, nice having a new technology, but radio as well, he's a big proponent of that. Like, both these technologies can be used for the glorification of God, for the good of his people, all of that. And so he published a newspaper that is, to my understanding, still in existence, which is kind of incredible. He His biggest, I think, the knock on him, and I think it's done well in the movie, is he loved the mission and he cared for things getting done, almost at the expense of his brothers, like his brother friars. And to the degree that it was said that they felt Saint Colby loved the machines more than he loved the people, and I think that's very fitting for entrepreneurs. Many of us, while good with people because we have to make sales, are very focused on the process and it getting done. You don't have an HR department for better or worse. You don't have an HR department, but it is easy. I think, especially as men as well, and if doubly so if you're like a Type A man, to just go, I need to get this done. I need to power through, and then if you're finding failings that way, which I do very often. I think Saint Colby is a good reflection of that. So he eventually is in prison. They round up all the Catholic priests, many Poles, really everybody. Jews, of course, but that was less relevant to Saint Colby being a Catholic. He ends up in Auschwitz. He is, not having a great time. Eventually, I don't know when this is. It's later years of the war, I believe, but a prisoner escapes. He gets out, and the custom is that if somebody escapes, I think they pull like 2 dozen, or sorry, a dozen or so men, and they starve them to death. Like, they just put him in a cell and they just let him die. As you can imagine, that would make people less in favor of escape or helping other people escape. It was evil, but it was a very efficient method. So somebody did escape anyway. They're pulling people, and this man, he gets pulled. I don't remember his name, but he says, I have a family, I have a wife, I have kids. And so Saint Colby, Father Colby, comes and goes, I'll take his place. Like, this just heroic act of virtue, because like what he's saying is, no, like, save this guy, I'll go die. Like, and he knows that in saying that. I think, like, we know the story. Well, we know, some of us know the story, and you hear the story and you go, oh wow, what a heroic act of selflessness to say, I'll take his place. No, what he's saying is, I will just go die. Like, that's just baffling to a modern man who's obsessed with comfort. Me just as much as anybody else, certainly. But he gives his life in that man's stead, who does go on to make it. Colby and his companions, they just baffle I guess the commandant who's in charge of the camp, and they continue to live. They slowly die. I think they lived for 2 weeks or so in there. Like, there is no, like, they're not getting any food. Like, there is no reason they should have. But Saint Colby, he prays with them. They end up singing songs, and psalms and things like that. It's a mix of Jews, Catholics, Polish people, just sort of a hodgepodge in there. Some of them who take well to Saint Colby, some of them who do not. But he's fervent in his prayer, even when everyone else is basically like, why are you praying to God? Like, we are dying here in the most horrific way. Our country is being destroyed. Our countrymen are being murdered. Not just our countrymen, but all these other ethnic and religious groups are being exterminated. Like, why are you happy? And he converts them. I mean, not quite literally. I at least not as I understand it, but helps them to realize that there is value in the suffering, and they basically break the will of the commandant. It's kind of incredible. he ends up like dying in disgrace. Not that that's funny, but there is kind of a poetic justice to it. That not long after the war, he divorces his wife, dies in disgrace. Like it killed him. Like quite literally, I think it killed him to see Father Kolbe and his companions and just not understand how he couldn't break them. They are eventually the remaining ones are killed by, I believe, lethal injection after a couple of weeks. They didn't even starve to death. Like they just have to be murdered because word is getting out, and like it's giving the camp hopes that they have to kill them. I mean, they'd already lost. They'd already lost like the optics, I guess, battle. But it's it is an incredible story. I think in a time where we're I think in a time where we, as a disposition, want to heroize. I don't think that's a word. Make heroes of the ordinary. Um, this was like if your listeners are Catholic and know that Saint Carlo Acutis was canonized not too long ago. This was like the thing, and I don't have a problem with that. That's not the case I'm making. Um, there's this sense in which people, I think, were trying to sanctify the ordinary, to make a saint out of the ordinary, and to say that it is heroic to live the ordinary Catholic, the ordinary Christian life. And like, definitionally, it's not. Also, he didn't live the ordinary life. Like, it's not a big deal. But in a time where I think we're trying to like baptize the bare minimum, stories like that of Saint Colby are incredibly powerful, and also reminds us how weak we are. Like it's a great reminder for me that I suck. I'm a terrible sinner. Like I don't even like being uncomfortable. And this man volunteered to die in like the most brutal of ways to save a stranger. And like I don't really like going without coffee. I could be better. But that is I encourage listeners to, if you can stream Triumph of the Heart, go do it. There's some great books about St. Colby's life, books, articles, podcasts, I'm sure, on it. It's a great story, and it's a great story for the modern times too. Like he is before, I guess, the postmodern age, but he is or maybe the beginning of the postmodern, the end of the modern. I don't know, whatever it is. He is a saint very much of our times, and his story, I think, has gone untold for a long time. So, or at least undertold for a long time. So I'm glad they made the movie about it. It was beautiful. If you can see it, go find it. It'll be good for you.
Yeah, and I mean, you even mentioned of kind of like, you know, we don't have to be like, this millionaire, billionaire, superhero to make this change. Like even ordinary people, like, just go do something and it will make
Yeah,
an impact. I've even got like the Charlie Kirk poster behind me. It's like he started at, 18. Didn't even care. He was like never went to college, just, you know, worked hard and, changed the course of this country. And so it's like you don't have to be a billionaire, millionaire. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to do all these special heroic things, to make a change. Just start, where you are, whether it's,
yeah,
at school, with your family, whatever it may be.
yeah. I think that's right. There is the sense in which you don't have to be an extraordinary person to do extraordinary things. People, in fact, when you look at most saints throughout history, most of our you know, political folk heroes of American history, things like that. I mean, really for America more so than I think any other country, because we didn't have the aristocracy in the same way. Many of these people that we look up to in in a civic sense or religious sense are just ordinary people who did extraordinary things. So certainly you need to do what is extraordinary for your state in life, but there is no requirement for who you are. Like there is no barrier to entry for sainthood and heroism in terms of your, birthright or your state in life or anything like that. All that is required is a receptivity to God's will and the courage to do it. That is pretty much, I mean, that's all that's required, right? It turns out that's actually pretty difficult, but anyone can do it. Most of us will not, or will not to the degree that we should, but anyone can. And I think that's comforting.
Yeah. And so as you run, this business, produce podcasts, edit podcasts, market them. Why do you think podcasts are, kind of so influential in this day and age? And do you think that will last, or do you think it'll maybe die down a bit, or maybe, come up?
Yeah, I think it may die down a bit in a qualified sense. Like we've seen podcasts kind of peak and then ebb and flow. Like COVID, we really saw a peak of podcasts and then it dropped, but they've picked back up. Yeah, I think podcasts will not forever be a boom town, but I think they will always be plenty popular. The reason I think that is, especially as people have a growing distrust in media and as AI continues to dominate the landscape, whether that happens long term or not. I mean, I've got my theories, but whether or not that happens long term, it is what's currently going on. I think people just want to hear something real. And that may sound silly, but I think it is really that simple. Like conversations around something that you're interested in, had among people who you think are interesting and worthy of emulating. Like they're good. People like that because the unfortunate reality is podcasts are great and so popular because people don't get enough of what podcasts offer just in their daily life. Like many of us don't have um, friends with whom to have these sort of conversations that we'd like to have, or, that many friends in general. There's certainly an epidemic of people being isolated. Um, Christian, non-Christian alike, whatever your values are, like it turns out that while Christianity is actually good for your social life and for your emotional health, plenty of people are sad and alone, no matter what their denomination or lack thereof is. So they're looking for it. I think in podcasts. I think the better side of that coin is it's just a really good medium for having nuanced, long form conversations. I think we're kind of over the 3-4 minute segments and 7 minutes of ads in a 30-minute time slot of cable news, things like that. I can't imagine that many people under the age of 50 still watch cable news, but so I think that's a dying breed, and they're clearly seeing it. It'll pivot to digital, and I'm sure CNN will be just a podcast one day, but still, it's a great, I mean, there's a reason we saw all the presidential candidates, or at least most of them, do substantive long form debates, or just chatting with comedians of all people, like stand ups. Seeing JD Vance do Theo Vaughn's podcast was a jarring thing. It was funny the bits I saw of it, but it was interesting. But it's just a great medium. I really think that's what that is. Outside of the people being sad and lonely, which they certainly are, it's a really good medium to have substantive discussions and to help people think out and figure out what they really believe, because they hear people they know, like, and trust say things they're interested in. I think, yeah, I think that's why. And because those are the appeals of podcasting, yeah, it may ebb and flow a bit, but I think it will always be the best way to build trust with your audience, whatever that may look like for your business or you as a personality or whomever. I think it will always be a great part of your marketing funnel. And that's a cynical way to put it. I just think they're good on their own. But I think as a business owner, it's really helpful. People need to know, like, and trust you to do business with you. They would rather do business with their friends. Most of their friends work for other people. So the next best thing is doing business with, engaging in commerce with brands they like, know, trust, feel that they represent their values. It is a win-win. I don't see any downsides other than your podcast sounding bad, but that is a solution. There is a solution to that problem.
Yeah. So, and as we close this interview up, any, final closing thoughts, remarks, advice, and where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, stcolbestudios.com, all spelled out, St. Colbe Studios. That is where we do, well, that's where you can find our work. We have a podcast called the St. Colbe Studios Podcast. It is hosted on our Substack. You also get in all the RSS feed players, Spotify, Apple Music, all that, or Apple Podcasts, all that fun stuff. That is where you'll find us. If you want to find, you can find me specifically on LinkedIn. If that for some reason interests you, I write some things on Substack from time to time. It's something I would like to do more, but I just don't take the time to. Yeah, that's where you find me and, whatever I may be doing at the time. Excuse
Well,
me.
awesome. I appreciate you coming on the podcast today and tell your story and what you do.